I begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to the land, sea, and community. I pay my respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander ancestors of this land, their spirits, and their legacy. The foundations laid by these ancestors give strength, inspiration, and courage to current and future generations. I extend this respect to elders past, present, and emerging, and to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Over the past 7 years, I've grown my home, family, and connections in the small suburb of Eden's Landing, situated on the Mununjinjali and Jujinjin country. These clans are two of the 9 clans of the Yugambeh people who nurtured the land around Logan and Albert Rivers for tens of thousands of years. I often think about how lucky I am to have been raised around this area, with all my family and friends close by, well-funded schools and daycares a stone's throw away, and an abundance of health and community services available to me and my children. Our beautiful suburb is populated by many young families with many nature walks and parks available for children to run, play, and explore. As I begin learning about the realities of our First Nations people, I felt overwhelmed and ashamed that I was so naive to think that everyone was as lucky as I was, not only in my present life, but also in the blessings I saw as a child. While I am continuing to learn about First Nations history and have recognised the effects of colonisation on the First Nations people, I am very much aware that this is an area of continual learning, and every Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander woman and family I meet can teach me something new. As I drive over the hills in Eden's Landing, as I do every day, I think about what I have learnt so far and how much more I do not know. I drop off my daughter to kindergarten and I look around her learning space and search for First Nations representation. I find many forms of representation in the ways of posters, artwork, books, and flags. I recognise a book in her classroom that we also read at home, one where she knows the words, showing me that her teachers are beginning to educate on our shared history. Aboriginal people lived in the land we now call Australia. The land is where people cared for the rivers and seas, collected shells to share, and caught fish and mud crabs to eat. When the white people came, they called the land Terra Nullius. They said it was nobody's land.
But it was somebody's land.
I then dropped my son off to his daycare, thinking about how in my ignorance I had not considered the importance of educating young children in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories, cultures, and contributions. After dropping off my children, I made my way to Logan Hospital, as I frequently do, actively trying to identify First Nations representation along my walk to the antenatal clinic. I had realised at this time that because I had never had a reason to stop and consider the importance of representation, I too did not consider what this meant for First Nations families living in my postcode. When researching my suburb of Eden's Landing, you'll be met with information regarding schools, house sales, retirement homes, and general information about my area. This was also the case in the neighbouring suburbs of Bethania and Homeview, also located under the 4207 postcodes. Upon further investigation, I found that 234 individuals identify as Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander in Eden's Landing, residing in 97 households within my community. However, in our small suburb, I did not see any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander representation aside from one tokenistic banner from the Logan City Council depicting a young man holding a didgeridoo. When searching online for First Nations representation close to my home, I found out about the Living Museum of Logan and the First Nations space, described as a space co-curated with Logan's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. The description tells how visitors can learn about First Nations languages and culture and hear stories from community and custodial elders and enjoy artworks by local artists within the museum. As I walked through the museum, I reflected on how it must feel for First Nations people to see items from their culture, history, and elders now on display in a museum owned by the Logan City Council and managed by local white people. Although elders from the community were included in the making of the space, the lack of First Nations ownership over the display was another reminder on the impacts of colonisation. I began thinking about my placement site and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representation within the maternity care system. I now understood that what I considered to be safe, equitable, culturally safe care may be different in the eyes of another. I acknowledged my inherent privilege and began to question the birthing options of First Nations women in my community, and did they have access to culturally safe, women-centred maternity care? The Djadjan Bora Midwifery Group Practice is a government-funded and midwifery continuity of care service model for women having an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander baby and planning to birth at Logan Hospital. First Nations mothers are supported to lead and be actively involved within the decision-making, planning and delivery of maternity services. Furthermore, services are integrated, connected and tailored to the local community setting. This model of care was developed in collaboration with local elders and communities to respond to the needs of the local First Nations community. The program differs from the Birthing in Our Community program, as it is not developed on the Birthing on Country framework. The service is underpinned by the principles of the Growing Deadly Families strategy and a part of the Australian Government's Closing the Gap initiative. The Growing Deadly Families framework aims to identify characteristics of effective, culturally focused and safe maternity care, embedded cultural traditions, values and beliefs of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and their communities, and recognise the complexities of First Nations kinship knowledge as a means of guiding practice. This is a positive step in providing First Nations mothers, babies and families with maternity care that is grounded in culturally safe, culturally sensitive, women-centred and holistic concepts. For women not referred to the Djadjan Bora service, maternity care is provided through the mainstream service model at Logan Hospital, who too have made attempts to incorporate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander representation throughout the maternity unit. However, current funding models within hospitals often take on a fragmented care approach, where continuity is not present. Further to this, in hospital settings where health professionals have high workload, burnout is often prevalent, meaning that responsiveness, competency, and cultural diversity may be lacking. In short, the workforce does not necessarily reflect that of the population it serves and in turn continues the cycle of inequity experienced by First Nations people. As I reflect on my learnings, the concept of cultural safety and how I will incorporate this into my practice as a becoming midwife is at the front of my mind. I acknowledge this importance of respecting difference and each individual woman's way of being, knowing and doing. As a future midwife, it is my responsibility to walk into each space with an open mind, heart and eyes. I know that if I am successful in this, I'll be working towards closing the gap and contributing to improving the experiences of First Nation families. I can see there is still considerable change that needs to be made and implemented to ensure a deeper level of systemic inequity is addressed. However, with this, I aim to continue learning and my journey to becoming culturally sensitive and to implement cultural humility in my practice as a midwife by being accepting and open to those in my care.